In the summer of 1993, a group of young, brave explorers chose to come down to Central America to find out what is Belize. They braved the harsh conditions of the summer heat and the primitive conditions that this Central American country had to offer. This was just not an exploration, but a coming home. You see, family members were there, ready to greet us as we exited our plane. We packed all of our belongings into Henry Bizier's truck and drove into town. Going past the cemetery and small stores, we were amazed at the lushness that surrounded everything in the country. Henry Bizier, the fire chief of Belize. He would be the most helpful during our stay in Belize, knowing every nook and cranny of the country. He was truly a Belizean native. As we drove into the city, we passed these small huts of homes that lined the streets. And then we finally arrived at Henry Bizier's home, where we'd call our home for the next 8 days.
Don't film me! I look horrible!
Good.
Well, that's the idea. I'm sweating over my lip.
Oh, you have your sister here.
Sweating eyebrows. I took a picture of your plane landing. You can put that at the front of the photographs. Howdy, Pat.
Hi, Miss Andrea.
What I do to it?
We gotta go back to that sign that says "Welcome to Belize" and get that in.
And Wilkie?
The heat was immense, and our two intrepid explorers and entrepreneurs tried to make the best of the situation,
There we go.
and they just might. But the fan would prove inefficient against the severe Belizean heat that would come within the next few days. Meanwhile, downstairs, the rest of the family gathered and talked and caught up. It's been quite some time since they'd seen each other last, and this should just be the beginning of a great trek across Belize. Flora Vernon's stay in Belize would be longer than the rest of ours and somewhat more arduous. Andrea Vernon, she would prove her driving prowess on the back roads of Belize later on in our video. Here, seated with her sister, whose hotel recommendations saved most of our lives later on in the trip. And here's Heather Bizier, the smallest of the Bizier family, soaking in all the new and lovely faces of family members she's only just met. And there's our cameraman, Pat Devlin, myself, who would later be attacked by killer insects in our trip. Out on the street is another member of our party, yet to be introduced, and would be the spiritual leader, Eric Vernon. Mr. Vernon would also be the fashion consultant for the trip, showing us what to wear and what not to wear, of course.
Didn't know I couldn't see till I got them. It's true because I knew something was wrong.
I knew something was wrong. I have to use something to do it.
Oh.
Here, Mr. Vernon plays the ultimate tourist, taking a few cherished snapshots while the rest of our crew gets ready to move out. We loaded up in the truck and headed into town to check out the sights. Our first stop, fire station number 2. These old trucks are still doing the same task they were asked to do over 30 years ago and doing it quite effectively. Before our trip began, we decided to get a bite to eat, so We went to Belize's finest fast food restaurants. Fortunately, we knew the maitre d', so we didn't have to make reservations, and we were served quite promptly. The food was quite good, and only a few of us got ill. How lucky can you get? We loaded in the truck and headed out on the road. The open highway of Belize. No traffic jam here. Henry, of course, would drive. He knew the way better than any of us. Behind us, Henry's wife and the rest of our party. In the truck, Eric Vernon, a native also to Belize. Our first stop was to the capital, and a lot of friendly faces there. The capital of Belize is called Belmopan, and it houses their parliamentary-styled democratic society. Well, looks like our traveler survived the first installment of the trip. No worse the wear. Well, no worse to wear for some of us in some places. Time for a quick photo, and then off for a little more sightseeing. Belmopan is one of Belize's most modern cities. It's evident by its design and architecture that this is a prominent part of Belize's culture. Now is Mr. Vernon's time to orchestrate a family portrait here in the capital of Belize. Of course, he's having a little difficulty with his family, but that's to be expected. The snapshot over. It looks like our hungry crew is off to get some lunch, but not before trekking up those stairs one more time. And fortunate for our thirsty explorers, it looks like the restaurant was serving the finest in Fanta. The menu said that the gecko was quite fresh. We didn't think it'd be this fresh. But hungry as we were, we decided to get the Blue Plate Special. But it seems that Mr. Gecko would have no part of it.
He's blowing up now. Go the other way, please. This way.
Andrew Vernon didn't order the Blue Plate Special. But there was enough orange Fanta to go around for everybody. Oh joy. And Eric Vernon was proud of the accomplishment of the crew. They made it all the way to the capital and were on their way to an even further destination. But there was still time for a little shopping here in Belmopan, so to the marketplace. Here you could buy local farmers' fresh fruit and vegetables, also some crafts from local artisans as well. Belize is a tapestry of different cultures and different people. Here the Mennonites have settled and raise fresh fruit and vegetables and bring them to market. And if you are in need of some mass transit, off to the Batty bus service for you then. Here the agent was also the bus driver, the mechanic, and the president. A very busy man. As you can see, a very tired man. Then we tried some local delicacies like craboo.
Bite it, I guess, and then drop it down the drain like we all did.
After a brief bout of projectile vomiting, our lucky camper jumped back in the truck and headed on down the road. As you can see, the landscape was changing, becoming more mountainous. We crossed over a single-lane bridge into the next town. Since we didn't have the blue plate special at the last restaurant, our crew was still hungry. So this quaint little town looked like a great place to get a meal. So, that's what we did. We drove to the center part of town, past the small shops and gas stations that lined this dirt-covered street, and found ourselves a restaurant that we were looking for. This quaint little town is diverse in all of its culture and its people. But even though the town's been here for over 50 years, it still has yet to have the road paved. And a little known travel fact, there are more stolen cars in Belize than all of Brooklyn, Staten Island, and Queens combined. A little travel information that the AAA book just doesn't supply you. Looks like this fellow here could be waiting for the next link up with the Batty bus service. Well, we arrived safely at the very first major point of interest here in Belize, the ancient ruins of Zanatunich. But before we can get there, we'd have to cross the river. With recent storms, the river had crested to over 20 feet of its normal range. We would cross the river the way they've been crossing it for the last 40 years, with this hand-drawn barge. As you can see, the water is a bit cloudy and muddy, this due to the heavy rains that preceded our arrival. With the truck safely in place, we descended upon our short but elegant barge ride across the river. It seems that every turn here in Belize, though rustic and primitive, seemed quite elegant and picturesque. And true, our barge ride wasn't on the most modern of barges. It was truly on the most dependable. Do you ever think he got tired of doing that? Safely on the other side, we disembarked and got ready for our trek up the road to Xanatunich.
Oh, we'll be right back at the door.
The 3/4 mile trip up the mountain to Xanatunich would be one that the passengers of this truck would not soon forget.
She was talking about holes. Usually the road used to be like that.
Let me sit next to Caroline.
I got a bruise fucked up. Go sit there.
This is where you usually sit.
Go sit there. Sit on the chair with him. Use your butt. Swing your head over quickly.
Arriving safely at the top of the hill, our travelers, with a few bruises in place after their ride up that barbaric road, descend out of the truck and make their way to the entrance to the ancient Mayan ruins of Xanatunich. These ancient ruins have been here for hundreds of years and are still much a mystery today as they were back when they were left by the Mayan people. Recent archaeological studies have unraveled a few mysteries that surround these ruins, but have only opened more doors for more questions. Our travelers decided to trek to the top of the mountains via the ancient stairs that lead to the top of Xanatunich. Andrea and Susan Vernon are the first ones to make the way up the stairs, minding the slippery rocks covered with the green moss. And Grace makes her way up the stairs, slowly, surely. Henry, his daughter Heather, and his wife Carol come up as well. The last of our party, Eric Vernon and his wife Flora, make the slow, arduous trip up the ancient stairs. The lush grass that covers these ancient ruins adds to its beauty. Henry takes a well-needed break here on his trip to the top of the mountain. With the heat sweltering into the 90s and the high altitude, this climb takes its toll on some of our explorers. But they persist and make their way to the top of the mount. You can see the ancient carvings etched into the side of Xanatunich. Following at the top of the mount, Henry tells us a little about where we are and what we're seeing.
Most of the mountains on the side is Guatemala. Yeah, that one right? Yeah. That's all Guatemala.
Yeah. I mean, those people are marvelous. They control the highest point
Yes, but they kill themselves off.
so they can see everything.
Yes, but they kill themselves off.
Yeah, well.
The voice of doom. It's on vacation.
Yes, the voice of doom is on vacation.
So they're going to excavate that hill there too, probably?
In time they'll
Flora,
in time they'll get
smile.
in time they'll when they want to go after
They
next.
have
So this is Guatemala back here?
no, this is the part of Belize.
Where's Guatemala?
Over that
Over
side.
there, where
Over
the smoke are.
Where the smoke is?
Yeah, kind of river. You see in between there, in the valley, that's the river.
Uh-huh.
It runs there,
Uh-huh.
and the river runs all the way through there,
Mm-hmm.
and over that side of the river,
Yeah, it goes back that way.
over that side of the river is Guatemala.
Guatemala. Yeah. Well, this is magnificent. I've seen enough. Now,
Most of over there Guatemala.
yeah. Henry, what type of cultivation is that right there?
Right there?
Yeah.
That's corn.
You see anything I said just now?
Corn?
You see anything I said just now? It look like corn to me. That and that field below it.
The one below. That's
See the one below it is corn.
Yeah.
two of them corn, yeah.
Okay, sorry. A walking tour. This is the kitchen.
This is where we killed our sacrifices. And then we would walk over here to the edge and throw the bodies down.
Why are they holding it up with a rope?
How nice.
Hold it with the thing on the other side.
What is that doing there?
Protecting something. Yeah, digging obviously.
What's that piece of
Our travelers, exhausted from their trip, and after seeing all there was to see at Zanatunich, descended down the ancient stairs and made their way back to the barge. In the car and headed back towards home, we drove past the majestic waterfalls in the distance, unable to see them up close due to the heavy rains that washed out the road. A view from the highway would have to suffice. Trouble was brewing with one of the cars, and we'd have to pull over to make some emergency repairs. It seems that the car that was driven by Andrea lost its muffler. Not having the necessary tools to get the job done, Henry Bazier took to using his hands and an oven mitt to get the job done. And there goes the Batty bus service, unable to stop due to its tight schedule. All this commotion and Heather Bazier gently naps in her mother's arms, unaware of what was going on.
Grab a bit off.
Once it's sweaty and
The local wildlife checking on the goings-on, but not very interested. Andrew handing the potholder to Henry. All of us very confident of Henry's abilities, but we were still a little worried about the outcome. You see, it seems that some of the local wildlife that we didn't expect to show up did. We waited patiently for Henry to make the best of what he had to work with. And he did. In a few moments, the car was ready to roll. Of course, minus a muffler and a few accessories. But nonetheless, the explorers made it back to their cars and started again.
See, one hubcap, one muffler. What do you got left?
She was going to.
One hubcap, one muffler. Well, what's next?
Yeah, we sound like a truck.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, just keep an eye now. See what else comes.
Safely back in the confines of Belize City, we made a momentous stop for Mr. Vernon. We stopped at the Wesley School, home of one of the very first churches that he resided at. This school and its adjoining church would bring back fond memories to Mr. Vernon in the very few short minutes we spent there.
Imagine that. You understand? I know she's living in that house right here.
Yes, probably not home.
I'll catch up with her.
Yes.
I'll be here for 2 weeks, so I'll catch up with her.
Good, well, welcome home.
So what you'll be having for?
This is our morning choir, yes. We try and rush up every Saturday evening.
Outside, Mr. Vernon shows his daughters the house that they used to live in, the place that they once called home, over 2 decades ago.
Bye, honey.
Back on the road again, driving the many miles to our next destination, a destination known as Mexico. Here we are at the border, and stopping in to check in with the border police. But before we could cross, we would have to take our car to the Mexican car wash. It was here that the Mexican authorities doused our cars with the mixture of Cuervo Gold, Strychnine, and cayenne pepper. A delectable delight of any means, and of course, sold in liquor stores around the country. Once we were fully deloused, we were back in the car and across the bridge to Mexico, land of the enchanted, land of the beach resort, land of lushness. Of course, we would see none of these things while we were there. We were going to Chetumal, home of the Guayabera shirt. Once inside Chetumal, we made our way to the marketplace. And here we searched ever so hard for the Guayabera shirt. And if you look closely, there it is. The 3 Guayabera shirts that we drove hours for. These shirts would cause dissension among the ranks like never seen before.
So, what do you think of the market so far? No comment. Heather, your cheese?
How's the cheese?
A number one.
The cheese. Good. Good cheese?
They came all the way to Mexico to get cheese made in Holland. Yeah.
With the 3 Guayabera shirts safely put away, our travelers made it back to the border and headed home to Belize. A little worn from their journey, but nevertheless, 3 Guayabera shirts richer. On the following day, 3 of our travelers, yours truly included, were breaking ranks and heading for some needed pampering. We were off to Ambergris Key and Victoria House.
This is the airline we're taking. If we die or disappear, find this camera. This is the airline to sue. Island Air.
With that needed legal announcement out of the way, we made our way into the ticketing office of Island Air. It was early morning at this time, but the heat was already in the 90s. You could see our weary travelers were well in need of a little pampering at the Ambergris Key Resort. But we wouldn't get there without first taking the trip on Island Air, a small charter service that operated single-engine props that took people from the mainland out to the Keys. And by the looks of these pilots, I wasn't sure if we were going to return alive or not. We finally boarded the plane and made our descent down the runway. Fingers crossed, we reached cruising speed. and we had liftoff. Everything seemed to be going according as planned, but there was still an air of tension in the plane. It was one of the passengers. I spotted him. Yes, it was Captain Dan Leggett, the meanest son of a bitch in Orange Walk and all of Belize. This was a wanted man and must be considered dangerous. For the next 25 minutes, we would be hovering 1,500 feet above the sea that surrounded Belize. Our pilot, young but experienced, checked the instruments, and everything seemed to be going just fine. And in the back of the plane, Susan and Andrew Vernon, enjoying the ride out to their island resort. A few short 20 minutes later, we were on the ground safely at Ambergris Caye Airport. With our luggage intact, we waited at the airport for the Victoria House shuttle bus that would take us back to the resort. With the heat climbing higher and higher, we were fortunate to be right next to the San Pedro Community Clinic. What a stroke of luck. And this is not the face of a happy camper.
Talk to me, not the
The camera can hear you.
Finally at Victoria House, yours truly met up with the Belizean mosquito.
Oh, shit.
After finding my bug repellent, I toured the facility of Victoria House. Here we stayed at one of the beautiful grass huts that overlooked the ocean, and we enjoyed the cool breezes that blew off the ocean through the palms that lined our huts. The cool, breezy sounds of the ocean soothed us, and everywhere we turned was a postcard image. This was truly a full-service resort. The staff here pampered us and saw to every detail. The crew awoke early and prepped the beach for the sun worshippers and volleyball players that would soon dance along its beach. The trees were ripe and filled with coconuts, free for the taking. This was truly a paradise. Ancient treasures recovered from deep-sea wrecks decorate the landscape. This cannon was recovered from a Spanish ship sunk nearly 400 years ago, right off the shores of Belize. Wildlife is abundant here and beautiful. Watch as this pelican makes way for his lunch. The grounds are decorated with the most lush and exotic flowers that one could imagine. This truly adds to the simple beauty that is Belize. And as the day drew to a close, the sun gave us one last gift, a beautiful sunset that danced across the ocean. Who could go to Belize without a snorkeling trip to its barrier reef? This barrier reef is second only to the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. Below these waters, you'll see some of the most beautiful specimens of fish and coral reef. The water here is so crystal pure and blue, you think you could see forever. Belize is well aware of what this coral reef means to it and the rest of the world. That's why this is a national sanctuary and park. No one is allowed to touch the coral, remove it, or damage it in any way. A park ranger sits above the water and monitors all activity that surrounds the reef. It is truly one of its country's treasures, and it plans to keep it that way for a long time. The waters here are home to many fish, some strange and exotic, and some dangerous, like this shark. But all live in balance and harmony here. The shark pays us no mind and just passes us by. There are not many places like this that one could swim with the fish as calm and as clear as this. Our snorkeling trip over, we head back to shore, and just in time, it seems some clouds have moved in, and a storm is just about to begin. These skies seem to be threatening, and a tropical storm outbreak in this part of the world is not uncommon. The beach is deserted, and it looks like everybody's taken in for shelter before the storm hits. The resort deserted. Everyone back to the mainland or safely in their hotel rooms. We headed back to the airport and caught the first plane back to the mainland. Our time here at Ambergris Caye had come to a close, as was our time here in Belize. We would soon have to be going home. We made our way back to the main airport and got ready to board the next commercial flight back to the U.S. It was a trip we didn't want to make, but we knew we had to. Andrea's flight was the first one to leave. Her plane ready, she made her way down to the tarmac. We watched and waited to get one final glimpse of Andrea before she jumped on that flight back to Orlando. And as she boarded the plane, she gave us one final wave goodbye. And as Andrea's plane took off down the runway, our plane would be arriving soon, taking us back to New York. And we would never know when we would return to this lush and exotic land, but we knew we were better for the trip and finding out what is Belize.